Day one of creating and becoming a path. Stupid. Day one of becoming a creative polymath. You guys might have already known that I'm a self-taught 2D artist and I post animations to YouTube, but did you guys know that I went to school for 3D animation? I'm trying to change schools though because they don't have the program I want, which is 2D animation, so you know, that's meh. But I figured today I'd put that knowledge to work and animate something for my semi-obsession, The Sims 4. For those of you who don't know me, hi. I'm Angel. I'm attempting to become a creative polymath with specialties in 2D animation and comic making. Today I'm working on 3D animation in Blender using a Sims 4 asset, just something that I've plucked from the recesses of my video game and scrolled endlessly online finding Sims 4 Studio and downloading different apps or programs like Mod Constructor in order to kind of piece together what I can and can't do. In a future video, I kind of want to go through my process of different mods that I wanted to make, and if I can make one of those, we'll start out super simple and then potentially I'll get into Python scripting or whatever. We'll see if that works. But right now I'm learning XML and Python in order to kind of fiddle around with some things that I've seen online that should be relatively easy. I decided that I want to become a creative polymath solely because I looked at my little brother the other day and I was like, hey, it really sucks that I can't do everything that I want to do. Like, I want to become an animator, I want to become a comic artist, I want to do programming, I want to create video games, I want to make my own studio and become the boss of it. I want to be a CEO and a businesswoman, and I want to make sure that I share my stories with the world, and it sucks that I can't do all of that. And he said, why not? And that got me thinking, because in my brain, they've all been separate. You know, like if you do one thing, you pour a ton of time into it and you can't do anything else. And that's mostly true. If you want to get good at something, you have to put those 10,000 hours in. But unfortunately, we don't ever stop to think about what we could be doing in between those 10,000 hours, which is basically you could build a secondary skill or a tertiary skill or so on and so forth. What I want to prove is that I can become a polymath in a creative environment, because I feel like a lot of people think of polymaths in a non-creative environment, and in reality, we could start to become polymaths in the creative sphere as well. You just have to work on yourself and learn things outside of your comfort zone. So that's what I'm currently doing. I'm hoping that eventually, if I sit down enough and I just pump out enough animations or enough hours in this certain skill that I'm trying to develop, that eventually I'll get better at it and that I can do 3D animation as well as I can do 2D animation. And while I'm going to try to refine my 2D animation skills as well, I think buffing up some of my 3D animation would be a clever idea, just on a less pricey program than Maya. So I'm having to learn Blender. This alone is going to be a total overhaul for my brain, just because there's a lot of keys that don't actually match up, and despite the fact that I learned how to turn the settings to a more industry-friendly type, it's still not quite the same. My muscle memory messes me up every once in a while, and it took me about an hour, 2, maybe 3 to get my feet under me enough to learn what the heck to do before starting the actual animation. After I started the animation though, it was pretty easy. Like, everything came back to me, my thought process came back to me, everything was right there, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I can start this up and I can make something fun for a later mod that I want to make in order to encourage myself to continue creating something that I want to make. Because my biggest thing that I find in all creation is if you don't want to do it, you're not going to learn very well. So I had to make up a mod in my brain that I wanted to see in the game eventually and then work off of that. So currently what I'm trying to make is a more gossip mod or more drama mod, depending on what I want to name it at the end. But I wanted to make it so that way there's a little more interactions where you can kind of gossip as a sim, or you can like spread rumors and the rumors actually do something instead of just kind of doing nothing like they kind of do in the game right now. So I figured that this would be a cute little animation to start with, because not only is it sassy enough for me to kind of get behind and get really excited about, but it's also one of those animations that I felt really confident with. You know, I like doing eye rolls, I like doing mouth movements and whispering hands, and you know, like everything about it just really helped drive it home. One of my struggles with Blender though, and specifically with how this rig for the sim is set up, is the fact that this sim, you can't bend bend them normal from what I can tell. Like you can't just take the hips and then bend them in half. What you have to do is you have to pull them up and then rotate the pelvic bone so that way the feet are standing at a 90-degree angle, but the person's floating. And then you have to drag them and rotate them back onto the ground. It's infuriating to say the least. And if anyone knows how to do it without doing that, I would so appreciate it, because that is just so infuriating, honestly. I don't know how the devs did it. I don't know how the animators in general at EA can do it. Like, it's infuriating to get a character to do certain things and certain poses. It's not fun. So I don't know if I'm just doing it wrong or if there's a different section, but if anyone knows, just let me know, because I'll fix it if I can figure out what I did wrong in the first place. But in general, this pose was particularly tricky, though I did want to get a little bit of the actual vibe down for how someone would lean over and whisper to someone else, and that little eye shift. You'll see later in the video, but that eye shift is very important for making it look more human. Basically, everything looks very robotic and static if you don't add certain poses to make arcs. Arcs are very important because they add a sort of liveliness to the piece. And in general, you're supposed to follow arcs just because it makes it more interesting to look at. But I find if you just let the machine interpolate for itself, it always looks bad. It always looks like the machine did it himself, because it did. The machine just went, hey, here's point A and here's point B, and I'm gonna put something in the middle and hope that you like it. And you don't want to ever do that. You want to make sure that you're telling your machine exactly what you want. So in order to get exactly what you want to add these keyframes that kind of tell exactly where you want it to speed up and slow down, where you want your slow ins, your slow outs, where you want the peak of your arc to be, and kind of where the base is that you want it to be. You kind of want to tell the machine exactly what you want and what you envisioned, because otherwise it gets very confused. But you also don't want to micromanage it too much, because otherwise sometimes the machine itself will be like, oh, that's exactly what you wanted. And you're like, no, now it's jittery and I don't know what you did to it, but it's not working. And I encountered that a lot during this section where whenever I rotated the character, I'd have to sit there and be like, well, is this really worth it? You know, now their feet are jittering and I have to figure out if I can just kind of scoot them back into position or if I have to redo the whole thing and, you know, work on each joint individually. I wound up doing a top-down approach, which really helped. I started at basically what I wanted the head and the facial features to do, but I left all the minute details to later. So I didn't move a lot of like where the eyes were going or the brows or the lip motions or anything like that. I just kind of let it go for big blocky motions first, and then I kind of pinpointed exactly what I wanted later. So I started with upper body and head and hands to get kind of these visual pieces down, and then I went to feet to make sure that, you know, eventually they were standing in the same place and they didn't slide around a ton. A huge thing in animation school that we learned is you never ever want to let your feet slide around. It just makes the whole piece look bad. So I focused for like probably an hour on feet alone just to make sure that they were locked into the base of wherever I was planning. I added a plane in order to make sure that they were at the same level that they were before and I didn't have my character bouncing up and down too much. We also learned in animation school that bread hands are not great. And I'll probably put up a picture so I can show you guys what bread hands mean in the industry, or at least what my professor taught me that bread hands mean, which is basically just they're flat and very disinteresting and no fingers are curled and they just kind of have that paper doll look to them. You never ever want to have bread hands just because they make your piece look very flat and very dull and lifeless. It's never gonna be a good look for your character. Never ever do bread hands. Don't do it. I'll probably do a video eventually of me just talking about all the things my professors said were do's and don'ts in the industry, and I'll make a whole video on that, but just trust me when I say bread hands are not good. I can point out so many video games where they happened and they look so terrible. And instead, I think that the Sims team actually does a fantastic job at making them curved even just a little bit, so that way they're not super flat and weird. But especially in my piece, I wanted to make sure that the hands were curved in a realistic way. At some point, my little brother walked in while I was animating it and he looked at me and he goes, "Hey, is that supposed to be whispering?" And I was like, "Yes, but I'm still refining. Why?" And he goes, "Because that hand looks really flat and stiff and just kind of stupid looking." And I was like, "Oh, geez, okay." So I went back and I worked like another 15 minutes on the hands alone just to get all the fingers in the right orientations that I wanted and made sure that each individual hand had something going on with it. So the one on her hip actually has each of the fingers curled and all of them kind of interact with how she squeezes her hip when she leans forward and stuff like that. While the one by her mouth has this cute little wiggle in it that was actually pretty unintentional, unfortunately. I can't take much credit for it until I refined it at the end, where it had this little flicker to the fingers that gave it kind of like a wiggle effect, as if she was putting emphasis on a word, which I thought was fascinating. Another fun, happy little accident that I had was the mouth being crooked. At some point, I turned the head and the jaw didn't come with it. And it made this great stretch for the mouth, which I have never done in 3D animation. It's hard for my brain to wrap around. I'm more of a pencil and paper kind of gal. I'd rather like have complete control over how my animation's gonna look with squash and stretch than try to like force it or break the model in order to get it to work. So for 3D animation, it's a particularly hard thing for me to do, but I thought that it turned out fantastic, and the jaw itself looks like she's doing this really over-exaggerated word or really over-exaggerated phrase. Like, do you see her over there? Wow, look at her. You know, it's just silly, but it looks good, and I thought that I should keep it for the piece. And I just kind of tweaked it and refined it a little bit so it didn't hang on for quite as long, just to make sure that everything didn't feel like it was an accident and everything was so refined. And it's not my best work. It is definitely needing some more tweaking, but I'd say within 24 hours, this piece is fantastic. I try to keep all my pieces under 24 hours just to make sure that I am doing things as quick as possible and I'm not over focusing or hyper fixating on certain things. My other biggest thing is me personally, I have to walk away from my work and then come back to it a day and a half later or two in order to figure out if it was actually right or not. It's like flipping a canvas in digital art. You get to see whether or not you put the eye too high up, or you dropped the nose too low, or his face isn't symmetrical enough. You know, you get to see those little tiny details within this piece. If I do it within 24 hours and then walk away from it and come back the next day, I'm like, oh geez, okay, their face is like looped to the side, or their eyes are kind of lifeless. Like, I didn't add a frame to slow in and slow out of the eyes, so it just kind of darts all over the place and looks very robotic. There's a lot of pieces like that where I'll go in and I'm like, oh, I should change that later, and then I do and it looks much better. So I've always come to find out that if I do quick renditions first and then come back to them later, it helps my art pieces to be way better. This whole thing was supposed to be just a short little blurb to show you guys what I was doing and to bring you guys along on my process. I'm hoping that I can share this excitement with you guys and bring you along in order to encourage you to become creative polymaths yourselves. Eventually, when I create my own studio, I want to hire creative polymaths. I want to figure out what they're interested in and help them thrive off of it by adding stories to our collection that will allow them to have field trips or fun little exciting blurbs, or they can really focus in on whatever they're hyper fixated on at the time and create a film off of it. Something like how old Disney was obsessed with trains, because most of the animators at the time were obsessed with model trains. And so a lot of it shows through their work, and I want to show that passion in my own studio. Eventually, I want to hire people with those same type of passions, and I want to let them thrive in the environment. So this is me trying out every single piece of the creative process in order to tell what parts are going to be most difficult, what parts I can help people with, and what parts I should really be looking out for to have them create something that's going to be something that they'll be super passionate about, and hopefully that passion seeps through. Eventually, for some of the future videos, I want to try out things like gouache or acrylic or potentially more charcoal. I got a little bit of that during my art school days in figure drawing classes, but I've never been really fond of charcoal. I don't like how it feels. I don't like the scratching on the paper or the way it sticks to my hands. I don't like the fact that sides just kind of get stuck to the paper and you can't work it back out. But that's part of the love for charcoal for most people, so I want to try it out again and have a different perspective on it this time. I'm hoping that I can do more 3D things in the future, or potentially gardening, or some sort of artistic dance. Something in the future that I've never tried that's super out of my comfort zone, or potentially something that's closer to home, like Copic markers or things like that. I'm hoping to get a wide range of different artistic things so I can know a wide variety of different mediums. So if you guys have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments down below. That'd be fantastic. Like, if you know of something that you're like, oh, this is a little out there, but you should try it, do it. Send me something in the comments down below and I'll go ahead and start a list. It'll be great. I'll probably start with a handful of ones that I know are pretty close to home, and then I'll start trying to venture out a little further out just to get used to exactly what I should be looking at. But in the meantime, thanks so much for following me on this little section and helping me grow outside of my shell a little bit. I'm hoping that you guys will find this as enjoyable as I did, and hopefully in the future we can grow together if you want to follow along with the videos and try out the different mediums that I am too. In the future, I want to see a lot more creative polymaths out there, so if you want to join me on this little journey, feel free to. Tag me in some videos of you guys doing different things if you want. Like, I'd love to see what you guys are up to. And as always, stay safe out there and keep creating. Peace.